warm welcome. He has been with the county almost 16 years, and he's helped here at Ware a lot to help us get connected to the land management and the going native all around the parks. Many of you probably have seen some of the work they do, and you can volunteer. So now I'm kind of a big volunteer with iNaturalist, and I post everything I see in the county on the Milwaukee County iNaturalist page. So he's going to tell us more about all the opportunities. And I think we're ready. Are you ready, Mark?
Yeah. If we can get the lights.
Yeah.
That is perfect. This way I can still see you snoring in the back. Gosh, first presentation, a full house, and being recorded. A lot of pressure on me here to get this right. All the slides, pictures in these slides I have today are from our park system, your park system. So I hope you enjoy. This is kicking off a vendor park and the view from the bluff, which is always outstanding. And some background on what our natural areas program is, what it does. And it's really been, I've been in it the last 16 years, and it existed 6 years prior to me coming to parks. But it really was a creation of an outpouring of citizens like you telling the park system we need to manage our natural areas and do something, which prior to that, there really wasn't anything going on. So it's been a fun journey. So a little background. So our park system is slightly over 15,000 acres. So the natural areas component that I'm in charge of is a little over 10,000 acres, so 2/3 of the entire park system. And 75% of the remaining publicly owned green space in Milwaukee County is within the Milwaukee County Park. So we have this, I would say, heightened level of responsibility for managing ecology, the remaining ecology in Milwaukee County, because so much is in our area of purview. We have 85 miles of rivers and streams in the park system and 51 ponds and lagoons. We're in a major migration corridor. We have 15 miles of the Lake Michigan shoreline protected within our park system. I believe that is the largest concentration of protected shoreline anywhere around Lake Michigan. So that's really something to say. And migration, not just for birds, but also invertebrates like monarch butterflies, we know, but also dragonflies, and about half our bats are migratory species too. So they're being we fall within Wisconsin ecological detention zone, and kind of the quick and dirty. In Wisconsin, there's a band that goes across the state, roughly a 45-degree angle from here to the cities. And that's the area in Wisconsin where the northern plant communities and the southern ones meet and mix. So
No, I named him.
Ours recognized plant community, so pretty diverse. And we have 75 at this point of 75 state or federally listed species that have breeding populations within our park. So, you'll be shocked area having that much diversity in it. But I think the thing people don't remember so much realize that your human settlement was often done in areas of high natural resource value. So typically those areas, urban areas, do have higher diversity. So this is a quick slide. I think this is one of my few slides that doesn't have any colorful pictures. So just bear with me on this one. But a little bit about our staff. We have 5 full-time staff in our natural areas program, and usually 4 to 6 seasonals. When I started, it was a staff of 1. So we've grown quite a bit in a short period of time. We do a lot of your standard land management activities that you'd see on state land or federal land. Oak woodland restoration, invasive species management, reforestation, plant and managed prairies and pollinator gardens, wetland restorations, native seed collection, wildlife habitat management. We do a fair amount of research too, which is really important to our success. So our research program really looks at right now 10 different taxa. I'll get into that a little bit. And we do spend a fair amount of time working on planning and watershed, regional, the dreaded government paperwork for us who love to be outside. But it's a really important aspect of what we do. And a typical year, we and our partners and our volunteers are working on improving the ecology of about 800 to 1,000 acres of our 10,000. And our research usually takes about half, we cover about half the park system in that time. So, and we've worked with 88 different partner organizations over time I've been in the park. So it's one of the reasons we've been so successful. So we have what I would call our urban biodiversity project. And searching over the last decade, I can tell you at this point, we have almost 2,300 native species of plants, wildlife, fungi in the park system. That is a very conservative number. I think the real number is probably double or triple that. But some of the categories like fungi, lichens, and always charming slime molds, we barely looked at this point. And there's probably going to be at least as many of them as there are plants. So at that point, then that bottom line, the other invertebrates, there's probably 1,000 different kinds of beetles by themselves. So really, this is numbers that we know so far. It's an example of, all these are species that we've found in the park system. Really some amazing ones there. So bird standpoint, Milwaukee County, I think on eBird for Wisconsin has the highest bird total. It's your pictures online that we don't need to do that. But we're keeping a digital library basically of all the species that are found in the park system.
Is that accessible by the public?
It's not public, just because some of the species are rare species, and we don't want to disclose where they are to protect them. But our data typically is. So if we do a bird list, all our bird lists go to eBird, so you can see those. All our dragons, our odnets, there's a a citizen science program called the Wisconsin Odonata Survey, and all our photos and stuff go there, so you can definitely see it there. Won't take it to the specific park. All our bumblebees go to the Wisconsin Bumblebee Brigade website, and there's a couple others. So some of it is. It may not. It'll tell you it's in Milwaukee County. It may say it's on the south side, but you'll be able to see that.
What's the one in the upper left? What species is that?
That is one of our spreadwings. It's a sweet flag spreadwing. And what is showing there, we have to take diagnostic pictures so someone can ID it 50 years from now. So the very tip of the male of the spreadwing there has certain characteristics that tell us it's a sweet flag spreadwing. So someone can film my job 100 years from now and they can say, oh yeah, this is the photo we need of that species. That's the location that gives us the voucher that tells us exactly which one it is. So a lot of our surveys are also done because we have, like I said, 75 listed species in the park system. As a public agency, a public land manager, we are required to follow all state and federal laws for the protection of those species. So we have to be aware of what those regulations are and make sure that our activities, people using the park system, or maybe outside parties doing work in the park system are following all these regulations. So we have some categories that will do that. So the bird one, in the last decade, our bird surveys, our staff ones, we've done a little over 6,400 of them. And we've had slightly over 500,000 bird observations documented within our natural areas. That gives us a really good idea of what birds are using what sites when. The public, birders like yourself and eBird, have at the same time frame submitted 64,000 eBird checklists. And that's really important. I look at the data you submit all the time when we do our management. So that's an important part of our wildlife management program. So far, 362 species have been documented in the park system for birds. 57 of those are listed by the Wisconsin DNR species of greatest conservation need in the state of Wisconsin. And we also have, it's a good, slightly touches on what Pat was mentioning in the other talk, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act dictates what can happen in the park system. If you have a native bird in the breeding season, has an active nest, that those can't be damaged or destroyed by other activities. So we need to make sure that we're following those. We also have implement internally that there's no mowing of natural areas. Like utilities have easements on our properties, so they can't go in and mow their easements during the breeding season. Birds too, so they're protected as we know. Plant inventories, we have 54 species of invasives that are on the DNR's NR40 list, which is their prohibited and restricted invasive species list. So there's laws that govern how we manage those. And we have 37 state listed species of plants that natives that are threatened or endangered or species of concern. So we have to make sure those are protected as well. Hopefully you've all heard about the federally endangered rusty patch bumblebee. We have it at 73 of our natural areas in the park system. So it is great distribution in Milwaukee County. The majority of the county at this point, because of our surveys and the public who've done surveys as well, most of our county is in the high probability zone, which is designated by the Fish and Wildlife, which puts higher level of protections for people doing activities in those areas.
How are the rusty patches doing nowadays? The last couple of years, the population here.
In our park system, like I said, they're well distributed. We find them fairly regularly on our surveys. We found our second nest here this past year in the county, and finding a nest is incredibly rare for that species. So I think only 3 were found last year. They seem to doing better in urban areas. If we look at some of the latest research, they're doing better in urban areas, it appears, than they are doing in rural areas. There's still some research going into why that is. Could be a number of factors. So it could be the amount of, could be the types of insecticides used on cropland. It could be the climate, it could be the availability of floral resources. So lots of people in Milwaukee County have flowers in their yards, not just in the park system, and bees will definitely use species that are native and some that are non-native as well. So it could be more resources. So hard to say. They're still working on it, but there's some trends in that area. But our natural areas, so far so good. We also have 3 other state-listed species of bumblebees: the American, the yellow, and the confusing. And the confusing is confusing. I can tell you that for a fact. But so we have, I think, 13 species of bumblebees documented within the park system natural areas. We do have a volunteer program. I'll get to some of those where you can help go and ID and record those for us too. We've just started doing bat acoustic surveys. With the onset of white nose fungus, almost all of our bat populations, or a significant number of them have crashed quite a bit, some up to 90% or more. So many of the bat species as of late have become listed species because of those reasons. So we've started doing bat surveys that really requires us software on our smartphones, going out at the right time, following the DNR protocols, and recording it records basically the clicking sounds the bats make. So it creates a sonogram of that the DNR will read, and they can actually tell you what bat species it is. It's almost like hearing a bird call and being able to identify the species. They can do that with those readings. So we've been starting doing that in the park system to see what we have for our bat populations, because there are restrictions for them as well, how we do our normal activities. So if you're going to do birding, you have to have a cool hat and sunglasses. It's required. So I typically look like in the summer on the park system. But I certainly have a passion for birds. I have a passion for many things in natural world, but especially birds. And relating to our bird surveys, our top 10 species there are not going to be any that shock you for Milwaukee County. I think maybe the two that stand out that are a little bit different than the rest, the greater scaup and the common goldeneye. We've been to the lakefront in winter. We know we have large rafts of those ducks. Actually, they're feeding on the invasive quagga mussels. That's what those two are doing. But we have a lot of unique breeding species within the park system, species that knowledgeable ornithologists around Wisconsin would say there's no way that thing breeds in Milwaukee County. But we've been able to find quite a number of these species here, and seeing how adaptable they are. It's really impressive. There we go. So we participated in Wisconsin Breeding Bird Atlas, which ended in 2019, the 5-year project. And this is what the Breeding Bird Atlas and our surveys told us about Milwaukee County. So these are the Atlas blocks, which are 3 miles by 3 miles. And this is kind of like, if you think of like a weather map, maybe. So green is a light rain. If you see purple, you better be in your basement kind of thing, more intense. So it can kind of give us an idea of how birds are distributed in Milwaukee County as breeding species. And it does correlate fairly well to the available habitat and diversity of habitat. The only 2 green spots, one's downtown Milwaukee, so not a lot of habitat. Makes sense. Our other green spot is actually just south of us here. And the reason why that one's green is we can only do surveys within the park system. And we only have one little park, St. Martin's Park, in that whole block. So there's more birds in that block, but from what we could survey, staying on county property, that's why that would be higher. So 123 species confirmed breeding in Milwaukee County are respectable, considering we are one of the smallest counties in the state and the most urban county. And we had 141 species showing some type of evidence of potentially breeding within the park system as well. So pretty impressive for urban county. So maybe Colleen has shared the spreadsheet with you guys, where Brian would love to see you go do bird surveys. I said I'd spend one slide on kind of explaining how it works. So this is really just built off of the data that's available at eBird, honestly. So you can go on eBird, and there's bar charts for each specific hotspot. It tells you what weeks of the year the hotspot has already been surveyed. So by mining all that data and putting in a spreadsheet for all our natural areas, I can see in the 12 months of the year which weeks are missing at a particular site. And our goal is to have a complete understanding of how birds are using our sites winter, through spring, summer, and then back in the fall again, and seeing how we do that. So that's what the blocks mean. All our natural areas are named after the hotspots. eBird hotspots are on the left. You go through the list. There's 163 of them. A lot of those hotspots we originally created just so when people bird at these sites, they're putting the data into a place that we could access it and we could see it. Because when you put your data, and I'll get into the next slide a little bit, it's important how you put your data in eBird. It makes the most use for conservation. So then we set a certain desired goal of a number per site. How do we decide that? Well, if it's a small site, typically we want to go for a one survey on every week of the year. Because there's limited habitat. But we have a larger, more diverse site. Let's say like a Bender Park on here. Our goal may be 1,000 bird surveys, just because it is such a large site, quite a bit of habitat, potential for a great deal of diversity within that one. So I also, decide as to how many we need to do at a particular site. And once everything's completed, every week of the year and our goal, then we're done. We're good. We know what we need to know on a site. And the last two columns are the current number of species on the left that's found at that site, and then one that's called benchmark. So for each type of park on here, there's usually one park that's been birded to death. And it's similar. And we know our benchmark park has 111 species. So if we look at A.C. Hansen, we really should be able to see most of those species at that park as well. So it kind of tells us if we get to the point where we've got 85% or more of the same species, we know we've got probably enough surveys for that park to know what's using that site. Because at some point, more surveys don't equal more birds. But we could put another 10,000 surveys in the Lake Park. Are we going to know anything that we already don't know about Lake Park? No, because Lake Park has a lot of surveys. So when we're doing it for our staff time, we have so little staff time to be the most efficient. We need to set a goal for each site. So kind of how that works. And just some e-birding tips for those of you to make your data you gather more valuable for conservation. So a lot of times you can have a main hotspot for a park. But people like to put in their own small personal private hotspots, which is fine. The main hotspot data is super accessible to me as a land manager, but your own personal hotspots, the data is still there, but it takes a lot more work to get at it to see what you were seeing. So you can in eBird consolidate your personal ones with the major hotspot at that park. You don't have to, but that is helpful for us when we look at the data that's there. The other thing, next one is making sure that your information is going in the right spot. So Lake Park, Locust Street Ravine hotspot. It's a narrow wooded ravine in the park. And there are 30 species on that hotspot list that don't go in that habitat. An example would be that list has common goldeneyes and red-breasted mergansers, and they're not in the ravine. They're over on the lakefront, and that data would be better put in the Lake Park Linwood hotspot right next to the lake instead. So I was making sure that you're putting your data in the best spot so it's the most usable in that standpoint. Make sure you label flyovers. I can use Cudahy Nature Preserve, which is a beautiful hardwood forest of trees, and it has Canada geese and sandhill cranes and tundra swans. They're flying over the park. They're not actually in it, but it's good to label your data. I can usually figure it out, but if a researcher is looking at data, they're going to those species are not using that habitat. Owls, I know you're a lot of owls birding. I would say, when you put your list in eBird, so if you see an owl, like this example of the northern saw-whet that we saw at Cole Park last week, you can wait a week, wait 10 days, and then add it to your list. Because owls are very, all the attention. A lot of people want to get there, see them. Very detrimental to them. All that extra stress, but you can still get it on your list for your list for the year. But maybe just wait a week or so before you add it to your list. Just something that comes. So we don't just do birds; we do lots of different things. So we inventory our less common native plant species within the park system. So each native plant has a number assigned to it, 0 to 10. And that number is called coefficient of conservatism. Those that are higher up on the scale, like a 10, means they probably exist in habitat sites that has had very little human disturbance historically. For those that are 0, pretty weedy species, black-eyed Susan, something like that, anywhere that seed fall. So we typically go out and we have tablets and software system, and we'll map the ones that are 5 to 10, just so we know where those species are. One, if we're going to collect seed, for restoration projects. We're collected our sites. We can pull up a map and do a search. I want to find every place where we've recorded Michigan lilies. And we also know the population size there is large enough that we can harvest seed from it, or is it a small site that we need to add seed to it to help buffer that diversity, the genetic diversity at that site. So really important for us to use it in that method. And to do our restoration work, sometimes we're treating invasive species. We use herbicides so they can collateral damage. If we're sensitive plants, it may change the technique that we do, or manual control, something like that, versus using a pesticide. And slide from Pat, because she asked for it. So we do in the last couple of years have developed a native seed volunteers. You can come and collect native seed for us. And I'll put Hallie's contact information at the bottom. She's a restoration ecologist, and she runs that program. We provide the training and the site visit. There's some online training you can take as well. So it's a great program. It's just in its beginnings, but it's definitely generated native seed for us that we can use back in our restoration part. So something if you love plants, you can learn a lot about them. But she's one of the contact, and it's been a really good program so far. We certainly collect a lot of our own native seed in the park system too. So they really go hand in hand. But the more people learn how to do that, the better. We have these equally beautiful species, all invasive species. You can see why they were planted in the yards historically. We do the same kind of mapping for them as we do with the natives. An example of what one of our maps looks like. This is Noyes Park. It's a beautiful woods with a small pond on the north side off of Good Hope Road. And this is the invasive map for the site. So we have polygons on there with the striped area. Really dictates a larger population of invasive. In this case, it's common buckthorn. And we have other ones that are little points and different symbols. And those are also invasive, but if it's a point, that typically means there's 5 or less of that plant in that spot. So we very easily get on top of and control right away. Usually our polygons are things we have to put more effort into managing and controlling. So as I mentioned before, we have 81 species of plants that we would consider invasive, only 54 on the state list, but we have this list down here. A lot of these are still used for landscaping these species, but what we've seen on our park system is they are spreading into our natural areas. They're starting to, but they're not on the state list yet. Just because nurseries put a lot of money in growing species, and it typically takes them 4 or 5 years to grow a tree. So the state really works to try and ease them into getting rid of that inventory and letting them know in the future that you can't sell these species anymore.
What's the protocol if one is walking in a park, a county park, and they see something they know, the positive, is an invasive species? Do you just, do your thing and pull them out, or what can you do? You can report that he's gonna pull them out. He's gonna have time. You're right there.
Yep. So if something like garlic mustard or Dame's Rocket, and you're 100% sure the ID and it's right next to the trail, you can. If it's like a larger area that it's going to take you more than 5 minutes to do, probably should get permission, because some of these species have really specific techniques you have to use. And sometimes they're in sensitive areas, so the walking around and moving stuff, maybe trampling good stuff. So I say it depends. We have a lot of our invasive species management programs go through the Park People organization. They do projects called weed outs in designated areas within the park system's natural areas, where we'll meet with the coordinator once a year, walk them through the site, set goals for it, and they're in charge of all the volunteers who come to the site and do invasives after that. So one of those classic, it depends. You see a garlic mustard right in the trail walking through here, I don't think Jeff will mind if you pull it out. Yeah. So I've got 2 slides and food for thought slides. The standard thought process is the best thing you can do to the site is go and remove all the invasive species, and you're a million light years ahead of where you were before. I will say it is complicated, and I'll give you 2 examples of this. So during the breeding bird atlas, we found breeding populations of wood thrushes at these 7 sites. This is a species of conservation concern across North America because it is rapidly declining in many of its habitat areas. So we, using the information, deciphering why were these birds just breeding within these particular sites? What was triggering this response? We looked at the size and habitat that was available. Typically, the common train of thought is wood thrush populations need a woods that's like 1,000 acres at least. Well, none of them are that big. You're not going to have anything like that size in Milwaukee County. So we looked at the mean conservation value, and that's basically the average of the plant conservation scores for that site that we talked about. And using the DNR as a special calculator, we can put it in. And we see that based on the plant diversity there, most of the sites were poor to fair. So, okay, it wasn't plant diversity that was driving it. And we also looked at invasive species levels. Most of them are high, especially with common buckthorn. And really what it turns out, so birds really care more about structure than they do specific species when they nest. The wood thrush likes to nest in dense thickets underneath a forest canopy. That's his preferred nesting area. That's consistent. And 6 of these sites, these birds were in a mature forest, nesting in a buckthorn thicket in that woods. So if we would have gone in there and said, we're just going to take all this buckthorn and this will be perfect for the woods, we would have caused basically the extinction of the species in Milwaukee County, probably. So it's complicated. You know, when you do invasive removal, you need to know what's using it, because they do use invasive species, and how will your decisions impact that species' viability to stay there? Are there enough native shrubs that can fill in where these birds can move if the invasives are taken out? Those kind of things. So there's an extra layer to it. Same thing goes with this little guy. This is our federally endangered species, the rusty patch bumblebee. Every one of these nectar plants that it's on is an invasive species. So again, you know, this is as rare as they get. If we're going to go in and wipe out all this invasive in a spot, we better know that there's another food source for them to go to, because you could. We're not talking like extinction from the county, but extinction gone, because their range has collapsed over the last 20 years. It used to go all the way to New York. Now it's kind of concentrated in northern Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. That's all it's left. So a great example of this one on the bottom left is on teasel. It's a patch of teasel that's maybe, I don't know, 20 feet wide by 30 feet long. It's on this edge of grassy spot and adjacent to a woodland. Is the priority for control? No, because the teasel doesn't grow in shade, so it's not going to go in the woods. It's not in a place where it can spread other parts of it. So can we just leave that teasel in a spot for the time being? And does it help all the bumblebees? Absolutely. So you need a plan. I am by no means advocating for invasive species at all. And our project partners, we did a little over 300 acres invasive species removal in 2023. So we do a lot of it. I just really encourage people to take that extra step and think about the impacts. I tell my staff all the time that, you know, whatever decision is, even if the decision to do nothing, we're going to benefit some species, we're going to hinder some species. There may be a bunch in the middle that don't really care one way or another, but you have to think through that process. We get a lot of help from volunteers, such as yourself, for community science programs. They had their community science day here at Weir, I think, a couple weeks ago. The available projects you can be part of. But in general, for us, we have wetland monitoring, bumblebee monitoring, nest box, rare plants, seed collection, invasive species removal, quite a few. So our volunteers on any given year typically put in a little over 500 hours to help us in our restoration projects, and that's huge. We wouldn't be anywhere near as successful if they didn't help us do that. So lots of opportunities for you if you're interested. Doing the bird surveys is a huge help. You know, it fills in a lot of those gaps. So if you want to say, I just like birds, want to do birds, there's the opportunity to do that. So our Natural Areas program does have a strategic plan that we developed last year that will become publicly available this year. We just have to put the final touches on it, and really lays out our whole process of managing the natural areas in the park system for the next decade. I think it's just an outstanding plan, and we could do a presentation on it by itself. But these are kind of the key components within the plan. The top one, which may seem a little, the top one's not quite the standard historic thought process for ecological restoration. The goal always was, the thought process was, to want to turn back the clock prior to Europeans arriving to where they came, into the United States. And really for us, it's about looking about how resilient the site is, and that may be utilizing native plants that weren't historically found here. We have to do the climate change because it's going to change everything here. Just in the last year, we actually went up in a growing degree areas for plant suitability in the United States. We went to the zone that was just to the south of us. We are now that zone now. I think that's the first time it's ever happened since 1990s when they started doing that. So we are definitely getting warmer. There's plants here that are probably not going to survive into the future because they're more northern species. Maybe they only persist along our lakefront parks where it's cooler and not necessarily this far inland. So we have to start planning for those type of things. But lofty goals, but through each one of these goals, we have all these action items in our plan, how we achieve those. So it'll be interesting. And it's an easy read too. It's not your typical stodgy government planning document. So that should come out and be on the parks website sometime later this year. Other things we've done recently. So about a year and a half ago, we worked with the county board to revise the Maine County ordinance that protects natural areas and wildlife in it, which is 47.08. And I'm pretty sure, I'm not pulling your leg here, but the old ordinance started out with something along the lines of "Thou shalt not tie your horse to a tree." That's how old it was. So it needed a remake. And within ordinance 2, we have a specific clause. Now this is called the protection of nature. That clearly lists what can and can't be done in a natural area. We constantly have third-party requests to do things in the park system, like new utility lines, new stormwater management, those kind of things that would be detrimental to our natural areas. In the past, where there could have been political pressure to encourage parks to do something that they didn't want to do, this ordinance really puts in place now the buffers so that we can do the right thing and protect the natural areas and the species within them. So, but this is available online. You just have this website called munico.com. All the ordinances across the United States are in there. You just look for Milwaukee County, you look for 47.08, and the whole one's in there. So part of the other aspect we're doing is always looking at how do we better protect the natural areas in our park system. I should say right now we have just a incredibly conservation focused leadership team at the Parks Department. They're very pro conservation, so we are lucky to have them at this point. So how do we use all this science we do and the data we collect? For those who like the bird, this is just south of Pennsylvania and Buttes. Ebert hotspot would be Oak Creek number 8. And people in the past said, why did you pick these awful names for these sites with these numbers? Well, it's our Oak Creek section 8, so in all of our management documentation, that's how we ID it. So that's how we made Ebert hotspot names. Love them or hate them. But so we know because birders have been here quite a bit. This area floods, the red area in spring. We know from that there's number of checklists, the 176 species found there. And it's one of the most important interior sites for migratory waterfowl and shorebirds in Milwaukee County. We look at all the sites. 17 species of shorebirds, 25 species of waterfowl, 5 species of golden terns. So we had this blue area just north of it that was a leased agricultural field in the park system. We still have some farmland we leased. And we wanted to figure out how we could best restore this for wildlife. So we took, the species that are already using the site because you've entered your data. And we actually did a wetland restoration here with the DNR and Ducks Unlimited and USDA and MSD all were part of this, where in that old farm field, we excavated 3 shallow ponds in there. And then we disconnected the drain tile that was draining the field, and the whole rest of the field was planted to a wet prairie. So creating and improving the habitat, building upon what the birds are already using right across the creek and expanding that area. So he's got some nice background. So on the north side of the county, right now we have a program, it's a federal program called the Area of Concern. And basically what that is the EPA went around the Great Lakes and looked at all these different rivers and watersheds going into the lakes and looked for some type of impediment. It could have been pollution, contamination, loss of wildlife habitat. So Milwaukee County, one of our main ones is loss of wildlife habitat. So luckily, most of our park system fell in the boundaries. So on the left side, on the top is Cole Park and the upper end of the Little Menominee River Parkway, all the way down where it comes into the Menominee River Parkway and County Grounds Park and Plate Park on the bottom. On the right side is the Milwaukee River Greenway. So we have Fletch, Lincoln, Kern and Pleasant Valley, and you have Riverside and Gordon and part of the Milwaukee River Parkway. They all are going to get habitat restoration work. So it's about 1,600 acres of improved wildlife habitat for a variety of species. The goal is to complete all the work by 2030, and the federal government's probably going to end up investing about $20 million into the restoration of these parks and the park system and improving the habitat for wildlife at these sites. So it's a unique opportunity of us that we're taking full advantage of it. A lot of the restoration work is going to be done by contractors. My staff and I do some of it. Typically, we focus on the highest quality sites within these areas, just because we can be a little more meticulous in our efforts when we work on them. So exciting project on the north side that's going to restore a lot of habitat. And there was a ton of wildlife surveys and plant surveys that went into these projects ahead of time, so we could determine what would be the best restoration work to be done with these sites. So it was really all based on the science of the project. Here's 2 wetland restoration projects that are being designed right now by Ducks Unlimited for us. This is for reference if you bird. This is Oakwood Road and this is 60th. People like to park right here on the road. Look at the wetland, the water on either side for waterfowl, for all the mute swans and tundra swan was released recently, trumpeter swan. So these 2 for us are leased egg fields, and we're going to restore the wetlands in here, breaking drain tile, filling in some drainage ditches, restoring the plant communities, enhancing these permanently for wetlands and taking them out of agricultural production as well. So very easily, at least this one is going to be pretty easily viewable from the road where people park right there. So great places to bird. Along the Lower River Corridor Parkway, we've planted 58 acres of farmland and trees in the last probably 6 years. And we have another 15 acres to go. We're going to put in this year, more to come. So, So this field we planted this fall. This one we just finished. The last 2 years we've been planting this one, and this one was the year before that. So we're filling in these gaps. We have other farm fields in here yet that we're going to restore and plant to fill in that whole corridor on the south side.
Could you just, oh, that's Highway 38, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, here's Howell right through there. Yeah, this one just over at the road. The east there. This is
Did you buy these farmlands, or did you just turn it into farmlands and then?
Years ago when parks bought sections of land through here, the farmland came with the land that they purchased. So basically, farmland's always been parkland in waiting. And the vast majority of it's going to be turned into conservation land. Some of it they bought. Here's part of the Oak Leaf Trail coming through. So there are some aspects bought for recreational purposes too. Other Oak Leaf Trail comes down here. This one that comes on the road and comes over. So yeah. And another important reason why I take farmland out, I'm sure you all have heard things about neonics and the pesticide coating on corn and soybeans, things like that, leaches into the groundwater, and it impacts especially aquatic invertebrates and birds. So the sooner we get that out of our farming system and restore the habitat, the better. With our tree plantings, with all these, because it's going to take at least a decade, if not longer, for the canopy to close at these sites, we seed the whole area in between the trees with native pollinator plants. So the butterflies, the bees, the birds can use that resource until the woodland finally closes in. So it's doing double duty in the time it's there, maximizing the value to wildlife. So how do we decide what trees to plant? That's a great question. Here's Grant Park. I'll use it because it was a really successful planting, and most people know Grant Park. We had these pink areas that were turf grass that we're just mowing basically for the sake of mowing. The public wasn't really using them. We wanted to enhance the value of Grant Park for birds. We looked at our eBird checklist again. we see 250 species. Well, we can't do something for everyone. Which birds we want to focus on? We picked the 81 species that are migratory forest birds. So we geared our plantings in the pink areas to those species and planted that turf grass. And we used species of trees and shrubs that probably weren't historically in Grant Park. They're all native species, but we picked them for certain reasons. And here are the reasons. So if you spend any time watching birds, you know, in the late winter, early spring, those trees that still retain their leaves, you see those nuthatches and everything working, the chickadees working over all this because it's the spiders are hiding, caterpillars, egg masses, whatever. So trees that retain their leaves over winter are important for us. Same thing with trees with, you don't go to dead bird yet. Trees with the rough bark, same kind of concept to them. And then we get farther into spring, species, trees, and shrubs that are going to start blooming earlier in spring when the birds are coming through. So not only are they providing a nectar source for someone, but the insects are attracted to the flowers, the birds are eating the insects. We also looked at species that increase the duff layer. So duff is basically the dead leaves, the small branches, the dead herbaceous plants in the bottom of the forest. And unfortunately for us, a lot of our woodlands, we don't have good duff layers because of earthworms. All earthworms are invasive species, none are native to Wisconsin. The glaciers got rid of them. So they're all introduced species, and they do a really good job of recycling that dead material and incorporating it into the soil. But when you do that, you lose all that habitat for the invertebrates that were hiding underneath that material. If you ever spend any time watching robins or any of our brown thrushes or maybe white-throated sparrows or toadies, what are they doing in the woods? They're just throwing leaves every which way. And they're under there looking for those invertebrates. So oaks and hickories are a little more difficult for earthworms to break down that material, so they last longer on the forest floor. So picking those species, same concept in fall and we had for spring, picking species that produce berries in that migratory window. I've sat and watched vireos just shove their mouth full of dogwood berries in the fall. You would think it. I've seen small warblers like a Tennessee warbler can't eat a dogwood berry. I've seen them pierce the berry with their bill and eat out the inside of it. So they'll still eat that resource. So, and then picking trees that have a lot of caterpillars that feed on them. Caterpillars are a huge food source during the spring, early summer. For birds coming through are feeding their young, and really good research was done and showing the value, which trees host the most caterpillars. Oaks are number one, highest value there, and this goes in levels of importance. So down to maples that have the least amount. So focusing on some of these species for sure. So that was our group we picked from to choose what trees and shrubs to plant at Grant Park. Science is a cool thing to use it. Migrating birds. So we probably all heard that up to 1 billion birds die a year from flying into windows. They just don't get them. They don't get windows. So, and as much as tall buildings, like some downtown, which I won't name, do kill a lot of birds, so do our average houses. So buildings 1 to 3 stories, our houses we live in are killing about 43%. So they're also having a major impact. So it's an old historic park system. We have lots of buildings in the park system. So we went out and did some surveys using some techniques developed at UW Milwaukee as well as outfit out of Canada. And we assessed our buildings for their potential bird mortality. There's about 75 of them. They're directly adjacent to natural areas, so they'll have a higher potential right off the bat. And then looking at which ones are the most deadly because there's a scoring system you go through. So our worst one was Curry Golf Course Clubhouse. So you just kind of see the little white dots on here, and that's what we're putting on the outside of the windows. You can see why a bird flying just totally sees the trees. We fly right into the window, but the dots are on 2-inch spacings. And as a bird, if it's more than 2 inches, like you put those stickers on your window, the bird thinks it can fly around. But if it gets that tight, the birds won't. They won't do that. Plus, the dots look white to us, but they're actually in ultraviolet because birds can see ultraviolet, so they really pop up for the bird. So it's a drop. The window strikes on that area because it's surveyed before and after well over 90%. So we've been doing that and going through our park system. This last year, we did Ross Lodge at Mangan Woods. We did Falk Park building. We did Scout Lake Pavilion and part of Zablocki that we'll finish this year. So we do about 2 or 3 buildings a year, focusing on the ones most deadly to birds. But nobody likes seeing a Nashville warbler like that.
Hello. I'm sorry, I'm just standing over there.
Sure.
Those dots that you have, like, what kind of dots are those exactly?
They're little stickers that go on the window. It's from a company called Feather Friendly that sells them. You can get them as tape, or you can get them like as a big sheet. They're easy to install. I have them in my own house. They work amazing. No birds hit the house anymore. And it may not be every window on your house. Some windows may not be reflecting vegetation, so that draws the bird in. Any windows that are kind of like an L shape, they're in the corner, those are really deadly. Or if a bird like can see through the house, like there's windows on the other side, like maybe patio doors on both sides or something like that, that's deadly too. So there are certain types of windows that are worse than others to target, but it's very effective. Yeah, and they're little stickers. And my wife and I just put new windows in our house, and we asked all the people who gave us quotes, will this impact our warranty on our window? And everyone said no, it doesn't. So it doesn't do any damage to the window.
Is there an estimate of how long they stay on or last?
Mine have lasted for a decade so far, no issues. I know the Milwaukee County Zoo has done quite a while ago. They put them on, I think it was the primate building there, and they've been on there for longer than that even. So once they're on, they're on. But if you wanted to remove them, they scrape off really easily. Yeah, but all kinds of weather, they stay there.
Do you know if the new Symphony building downtown where they have all the names on the glass panels, does that work that same way?
That I don't know. I know when they built Pfizer Forum, they used etched glass the birds can see, and that works. So I don't know if the names possibly. Yeah. So why do we need conservation? Why do we need a park system? So here's this. This is a sad, depressing slide. We don't lose any of you here, but we've all heard we've lost a third of our birds since the 70s. In my lifetime, I was born in 75, so we've lost that many birds. Insect populations are estimated to decline 40% globally. A third of all insects may be endangered. We just don't know. There's just not enough research. Monarchs have declined by 85% since the 80s. I just saw last week the annual monarch estimate in Mexico, and it's the second smallest it's ever been there. Back in 2007, 150 species were likely going extinct every day. So the time I've talked to you, we've lost 9 to 10 species. Gone. And this just came out last week. United Nations said 20% of all migratory species are at risk of extinction because of climate change and human beings, our activities. Because we know that we've converted almost 70% of the land base on the entire planet to our benefit. And for us in Milwaukee County, we've lost about 95% of our natural areas prior to when Europeans came here. So significant. And maybe one of the most things that people don't think about, most challenging things is, how do you appreciate what's already been lost? Like we can walk in a nice woods in the county and say, this is a beautiful woods, is the best woods we have. And yeah, it may be, but 200 years ago, it had 100 more species in it. But we don't have that direct experience. It's like someone saying, there used to be 3 billion passenger pigeons. Like, how do we quantify that? We can't. An example, with my staff out in the field, we're at Grove Park maybe last year, and a flock of 500, 800 red-winged blackbirds flew over, and they were just all excited. I love that they're excited that they see that. And then I have to explain to them, when I was their age, I grew up just a little bit east of the Horicon Marsh. I said that flock was 10,000 birds. Yeah, red-winged blackbirds have declined by like 136 million birds. It's one of our most common, most adaptable species. So the challenge is for you to actually do your homework, understand what you've already lost, versus being content with what seems like good at this point. But the positive thing is you can get involved. There's all kinds of organizations that you can volunteer for. These are some of the ones that if you submit your data, iNaturalist, to the Wisconsin Butterfly Page, Bumblebee Brigade, Wisconsin Witness Survey, we as our program, we look at all those data sources at the end of the year, and we collect all the data that you've submitted. So you don't need to submit it to us directly. We can see that. Milwaukee County has dozens and dozens of conservation organizations that you can volunteer with, doing a wide variety of things. Something I encourage all of you to do is mentor someone. Teach them what you know. That's so important. I wouldn't be where I was in my career in natural resources if I didn't have good mentors along the way, professionally and personally. Plant native plants and put up your bird dots. Those are easy things that everybody can do, no doubt. But we wouldn't be as successful as we were. As I mentioned, we have 88 different partner organizations we work with so far. You guys made the list. You're right there in the center. Congratulations. I do appreciate all the bird surveys that you've been doing. But we work with, a lot of varieties, not government agencies, not-for-profits, educational institutions, businesses, community organizations, funders, church groups, you name it, the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. So we have all kinds of projects, and we have this great public park system that they can participate in. And at the end of the day, it belongs to you. I just work for you. We try to do our very best, but we appreciate all the help. So, I think that's my last slide. I'm almost lost my voice. So, any questions you may have? In back first.
I have two things.
Yeah.
Phragmites.
Yeah.
Phragmites. Is something being done with them or?
We do. Fortunately for us, we have very little of it in our natural areas. We've done wetland restoration work. It typically takes, I'd say, same along the line with mostly the cattails you see are not native cattails. Typically takes about 3 years of control, herbicides and digging, a combination of both, and they can be eliminated. We've been effective at removing it in some of our small wetlands. Yeah. You see it more if you go up towards Green Bay, which is the epicenter. Yeah. And the challenge with invasive species, and that's a good point, that we are in the perfect storm for invasive species in Milwaukee County, because we have an international port in our harbor, we have an international airport, we have a highway system, multi-state highway system that brings everything up through there. We have well-meaning people planting plants from all over the world in their yards, all over the place. So invasive species, yeah, it's part of our life and what we do with our management. Phragmites can be challenging. I would get on it early as you can and do that. But it's a combination of mowing it twice during the year. You can't use herbicide on until it puts up the flowering head. The herbicide is not effective whatsoever, and you can't control it. You gotta be persistent.
And are you in favor of no mow May?
Given our changing climate, it's almost, if you have a yard that has a lot of clover in it, like if this isn't pristine turf grass, then yeah, the clover is very good. If it's just mainly just grass in there, limited value to it. But yeah, I've never had a yard that was just a perfect turf grass yard at any point in my life. So yeah, if in that scenario, you're okay. But even if you have things like, there's not plants that'll come up in a yard every spring, little purple flowers, things like that. Not the squirrel, but the other ones. Bees will use that. If you have some clovers in your grass, then yeah. Yes.
Your 68th Street Oak Leaf Trail.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of clearing. What's the thought process to that?
So along the river there, that's actually MSD.
Okay.
They're being required by, I want to say it's Army Corps of Engineers, because there's these historic stone walls along the Menominee River there. And the tree roots have been impacting and destabilizing those. So they're being required to remove them. So even though it's parkland, there's a lot of organizations, easements on our property that they can go and do maintenance work for things that built infrastructure that they have. So yeah, that's through MSD. Doyne Park had a whole bunch of moved recently, and it's going to have to go further to the west for the removal. Yeah.
Because where they cleared is where I've seen the majority of my woodcocks dancing.
Oh, I can believe it. Yeah.
And that's going to change their habitat considerably.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Parkland, if somebody has an easement on us, there's very limited, these are historic agreements. That, Yeah, we can guide them slightly. There's a spot we surveyed the other day that has a small patch of a species of tree called wafer ash. It's a state listed species where we say, okay, we need to protect this. It's a state listed species, and they will try and accommodate and work around it. But that's that clearing along the Omni River has been for MSD working in there. Yep.
Who manages the water, the rivers and the?
In channel, MSD has jurisdiction. So the land on the banks, a lot of times Parks Department owns it, but not always. Sometimes it's privately owned or someone else owns it. So it depends on the location. But anything in channel will be MSD. Is a lead organization.
And some of the deadfall just is jamming everything up.
Yeah, it's really a matter of for them, it has to somehow negatively impact built infrastructure. So if that's your basement or road or bridge, then they typically allocate resources to do the removal. But for a lot of our large floodplain areas, if it's just natural areas on both sides, it just stays there. Yeah, and so with the ash trees dying, we lost about a third of the trees in the park system. So that was probably about 300,000 trees. And a lot of them grew along rivers because historically that was farmland that was just let go. And ash trees are a pioneering species, so they filled in really rapidly. So that's where you see lots of deadfalls, and you will probably for the next 5 to 10 years along those river corridors. It's pretty stark if you look at aerial photos of pre-emerald ash borer and post along the river. I mean, it's just lush green and now it's just huge dead areas.
Yeah.
The trees have died. Yes.
I'll see areas where people, the government charge them money to stop mowing, and then prickly ash will just take over it. Is that something you see as a positive?
If it's prickly ash, because most of the time it's buckthorn that takes over. Yeah. So like a lot of the parkway here, historically, they pulled back the mow lines. And it's just dense walls of buckthorn along the parkway. If they would just mowed it once a year back then, they would have suppressed it and kept it from being as bad as it is today. So, but if it's prickly ash, a native species, that's totally fine. Yeah.
So, if there's 15,000 acres and you're managing 10,000,
yeah.
Who are the other managers? Who else is managing that same? Or is your values?
Pretty much us. Only time other park staff goes into our areas, let's say there's a natural along a roadway or a trail and there's dead hazard trees. Sometimes our forestry staff will go in and remove them for safety purposes. Once in a while, they'll do a couple projects for us a year where they have a specialized piece of equipment called forestry mower over by Anderson Lake down the parkway here, Ebert Hotspot number 9. You see a lot of forestry mowing going on right now. We're doing a lot of grassland, pollen layer, habitat restoration work. So they'll do a couple of those parks for us, but mostly we're the only ones typically on park staff going in a lot of these areas.
So I was just there today at Anderson Lake.
Yeah.
And saw that, are they tearing up buckthorn?
It's a machine.
I mean, it just shreds everything.
It does. It's got big teeth on the front of it, and it's kind of like a bobcat or a skid steer, a little bit more heavy duty, but it just grinds it up. So what we're doing there is we're allowing the dogwoods to come back because we want them, but the buckthorn will spray and treat, and then we're actually been seeding in there. Ideally, we could use, so for prairies and things like that, they use it here to fire for burning. But there's a lot of parts of the park system where it's a little more challenging. I don't typically worry about the fire itself, but we're also liable.
Back.
So
We all know that.
we use herbicide.
The herbicide is buckthorn specific and won't harm the dogwoods, or?
We're very careful as we do it. It's a slow
Okay.
process. You can see some large areas, companies will come in with like a big sprayer and boom. Ours are backpack sprayers, so be very specific. You can go through and greatly reduce collateral damage and herbicide.
Thank you.
Yes.
With the increased emphasis on alternate energy sources, I don't know what Milwaukee County is doing in way of solar panels, but there is an increase in the use of solar panels in large swaths of many acres.
Yeah.
What is being done to assess the effect on flora and fauna?
I've seen some research papers on it, and what they've been trying to do at a lot of sites is plant native prairie around those panels where they are, and use mowing as a technique to manage them. A lot of times, for the most part, what I've seen, I grew up near Lamira, so near Horicon Marsh. Lamira has lots of solar panels going in right now if you drive up that way. And it's all going in agricultural land, which had little to no wildlife value to start with. So if they can plant some native between the panels and do it that way, they'd actually be improving the habitat somewhat there for the species. So we don't have much of it in the park system just because a lot of our buildings need the roofs repaired before you can put solar panels on them. So we haven't done anything in the park system. I do think the county has done it in certain other places though, but depends on where they're going. And if they're going in an existing natural area, definitely a concern of loss of habitat. But when I've seen most of it's agricultural land at this point, at least around Wisconsin.
So if I could just interrupt for anyone, I think we have time for a question from our Zoom audience. If anyone would like to unmute yourself, and I think we have time for a question from the audience at home. If anyone has a question for Brian.
Everybody's shy.
Okay, I guess no one at home. Oh, hold on. Okay, yeah, go. I'm sorry, was there someone at home that had a question?
I do. Hi, it's Betsy from Grant Park.
Hi, Betsy.
Hi. Hey, Brian, when you were talking about the trees or the plant materials that we're going to be looking at more in the future by virtue of climate change, what can you name about 5 trees that would be amenable to be planted now in the interest of the future of the now and the future?
We have a list internally that I can email you, Betsy, but happy to do that. We have a list that has potential climate change species out, because typically when we do our tree plantings, we have about 15% of the overall planting are what we call climate change species. Ones that worked well in our plantings, American sycamore has done well, Kentucky coffee tree. We've done pecans, and pecans are doing well. We are a native species in Illinois. Redbud, hackberry, we're on the northern edge of the range. Redbud, we're on the northern edge of the range. Shingle oak comes about as far north as Chicago naturally. So that's another one, but I can send you the list with the species on there. Okay. I would say one of the ones that struggled for us, flowering dogwood, has not done well in our plantings. We do plant tulip poplar, and it has a tendency to top kill, but it suffers back. I know they have some historic, huge tulip poplars here in Whitnall Park and the Burner collection that have done well. So they should be. If you look at planting guides, they usually say that our planting zone, it goes into northern Illinois and takes kind of a hard left to the east and goes down to central Indiana. So a lot of those species, those northern Appalachian species, Ohio buckeye, things like that, should do well here in the future, because our climate's supposed to be very much like southern Pennsylvania going forward. So I think a lot of those Appalachian species do well. Black locust is a perfect example. It's an Appalachian species that's native. It does really well. So I would say any native, you're looking at is trying to pick one that doesn't have super aggressive tendencies in its natural range. That's kind of why we haven't planted any pawpaws in our plant park system. In our natural areas plantings, I think we've done 5 last year just to test them, because they grow naturally in river bottoms in Illinois, but they can be fairly aggressive. So we've been cautious as to which species we pick, but I'm happy to share that list.
Great. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Great.
Quick question. In order for our data to be useful to you that we add to iNaturalist, does it have to be attached to a project, or can you just extract what you need based on like the location?
I can just pick Milwaukee County in the year, and I can pick like text, so like I can pick mammals, and I can pick reptiles and amphibians. So yeah, you just need to enter it on iNaturalist, and that'll be totally fine.
Great, thanks.
And I do scrutinize eBird lists. I look at them, and I'll point things out to eBird reviewers, and I think, well, that's just not possible at that spot. So I do let them know occasionally. There's not many. Once in a while, I'll see something reported for one of our sites, and the comments clearly say it's saw in Waukesha County. Yeah. So I do double check, but eBird's really good for the most part that they catch that stuff pretty quickly. Once in a while, they'll kick me in the shins. The other day, last week, I saw my first rusty blackbird of the year, and I said, "No way, no way possible." So you got to put in all the extra data. Yeah.
So do you need us to be birding the little pocket parks that are in our neighborhoods more?
That definitely helps. Those are ones that don't have a whole lot of bird data yet. Our lake park, all our lakefront parks are pretty good because a lot of birders gravitate there. But these smaller community parks are still important. And I think for those of you who have done some of those bird surveys, especially in migration, they're like, wow, there's actually a lot of diversity here. This time of year, you're probably going to get 15 to 20 species, and yes, the usual suspects. But that's good to know because they're still using the habitat. But if you're going in that spring migration window or the fall one, you'd be surprised what you can find in these little parks that maybe just be 5 or 10 acres of trees. Yeah, so that's definitely important.
Well, there's parkland that's not active parks, right? I mean,
yeah, well, there's parklands separated into parks and parkways.
Yeah.
So a lot of the natural areas, the bigger natural areas are River Parkway, Oak Creek Parkway, Menominee Parkways. So yeah, they're separate from parks. So those are the ones that typically have the weird numbers, because they're numbered from north to south in the eBird checklist. So yeah.
Well, I think we should give Brian a and well, if you still have a question, you can always ask it. If anybody wants to know more about the eBird class, I'm right here.
Our natural areas annual cleaning report every year, and should be up on the parks website pretty soon. We have easy website to remember. It's countyparks.com. I don't know who got that. Somebody was thinking. But if you go to the tabs on top, there's a what we do tab, and there's a conservation tab under that. So things are put there, but we also, we do social media. We have a Milwaukee County Parks Natural Areas Facebook page where we post our ongoings throughout the year. And we have an Instagram account with the same on there, so you can get an idea of what we're up to and what we're doing pretty regularly.
So Colleen often posts on Facebook for Wisconsin Metro Audubon about the parks that you kind of select each week.
Okay.
So you can get a list there of where it goes.
It's a great way to do conservation. You just get a bird. That's all you have to do. Do something you enjoy doing. Yeah, but thank you, and you can always reach out to me at Parks. Our emails are all basically the same. It's our first name dot last name at Milwaukee County WI.gov.
Brian, if you like, there's some dry erase markers on the board behind you, and you're welcome to, if you want to write it down. If you're okay with that.
Hear my pen and shit.
I guess I'll also promote that you should just go to Wisconsin Metro Audubon Society. You got a website and sign up, become a member.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay.